We also know that we're the most dynamic economy in the world, that we have been through tough times before, and that we're going to come through this time again. Our entrepreneurial system has delivered unparalleled levels of productivity and growth and prosperity. During my presidency, we have faced tough times after the terrorist attack of 9/11, and we came through strongly. And we're going to come through this. No question the times are tough, but no question America will emerge. And yet we got some work to do, and that's what I want to share with you. The immediate challenge facing the economy is a lack of credit. The problem became clear when the housing market declined and complex financial assets related to home mortgages dropped in value. People put together securities based upon mortgages, and when the mortgages' value went down, so did those securities. And this led banks that owned the securities to suffer losses, and then they found themselves short on capital. Some banks have failed, and other banks, in reaction, have restricted lending to businesses and to each other. And that's the definition of a credit crunch. People just are not lending. Nations around the world, especially in Europe, are facing severe credit shortages of their own. So this isn't a problem just in the United States. It's a problem that is worldwide. To some people, the credit crunch might sound just simply like technical talk. It's a technical matter. But to people who work in Guernsey, you understand that credit is the fuel that drives economic expansion and job creation. And here's how. See, when credit runs dry in one part of our economy, there's a chain reaction. So you want to sell a desk to somebody. That person needs to borrow the money in the short term to buy the desk. And yet, because the credit has tightened, because if some banks aren't lending, a potential customer doesn't have the money to buy your desk, and that affects you. So a lot of the talk that you're hearing about credit crunches applies directly. It hurts your suppliers. It affects the entire economy. Similar stories play out not only in businesses like Guernsey, but all across the economy. And if a credit crunch were allowed to worsen, the outcome would become much worse, with widespread job losses, and this country could be in possibly a painful and deep recession. So I decided to do something about it. As you know, I'm a market-oriented person. I believe markets ought to be allowed to work, until I was convinced that this time the government needed to act, and needed to act boldly in the face of a significant problem. And so I went to Congress, and I asked Congress to pass a rescue package. And there were some tough moments in the negotiations, as you might remember. Nevertheless, Republicans and Democrats did come together to pass a good bill that will enable us to handle this challenge head on. Now, the plan will provide the government a range of tools to help banks rebuild capital, for example, so they can help move credit that will enable people to buy your desks. It'll make it more likely, people are going to have less job insecurity. I mean, when you're building desks and selling desks, you find work and keep work. The bill ensures that responsible, hardworking Americans are protected. I mean, one thing is for certain, we don't want your money to reward failed executives. There's oversight as the bill gets implemented. In other words, people in Washington were worried, well, there's too much power in the Treasury, therefore let's have reasonable oversight. And I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. It temporarily expands federal insurance, bank and credit union deposits of up to $250,000. That's important. In essence, it's a safeguard for a lot of small businesses and a lot of families. In other words, if you've got cash in a bank of up to $250,000, it's safe. The FDIC has never failed to make good on its promise, and it won't fail to make good on its promise. And these are urgently needed steps. They will help bring stability to the volatile markets. They'll help protect 401ks and retirement accounts. And as the markets begin to stabilize, it'll help markets overseas. I've been in close contact with European leaders. I was on the phone with them this morning to ensure that our actions are closely coordinated. We live in a globalized world. We want to make sure that we're effective at what we do. Once we made the decision that there is a role for the federal government to move to stabilize the markets, we want to make sure that all of us move in the best coordinated way as possible. And interestingly enough, the finance ministers from the G7 and other leading nations will be here in Washington this weekend to make sure that the response is coordinated. It's going to take time for these actions that are described to you in the bill to have full effect. You want to make sure that when we move effectively. You want to make sure that the plan is well thought out and well delivered. Thawing the freeze in the financial system is not going to happen overnight, but it will be a process that unfolds over several stages. And obviously the first stage began last Friday when I signed the rescue package into law. And so the Treasury Department is moving aggressively to implement the new authorities. In the meantime, the Federal Reserve and the FDIC will use their powers to help stabilize the markets. Just this morning, the Federal Reserve announced action to provide additional liquidity to credit markets. The Federal Reserve moved to try to, free up liquidity so that this credit crisis begins to unwind. A few weeks from now, the main elements of the new legislation will begin to kick into gear. And as banks rebuild their capital, they'll be able to increase lending to each other and begin approving new loans for families and businesses. It's not going to happen all at once. It'll be a gradual process, and it's going to take time to have its full effect. As the banking sector and the market for troubled assets recover, the government will begin to recoup some of the taxpayers' funds invested in the recovery. In other words, some of these assets that were taken are of depressed value. Home prices are down, the value of the assets are down. Eventually, we expect that much, if not all, of the tax dollars will be recouped. The financial troubles are the most urgent challenges facing our economy today, but they're not the only ones. And we'll spend a little time talking about them, and then I'll be glad to answer some questions if you have any.